right. Listeners of the world, I promised more Patreon content, and I am here to deliver. The biggest guest we could have gotten. Very highly requested.
Really?
Big time star.
Big times. Wow.
Pedro Deluca is here exclusive on the AIW Patreon.
Wow.
You got to pay to hear this interview because he is the chief financial officer.
That's right.
I don't think he wanted that job. He just inherited this position. So, yeah, we really have nothing scheduled, nothing on the docket. We're just going to kind of freestyle it here for a little bit on Patreon. But Pedro, is this your first podcast? This has got to be your first AIW.
It's definitely my first AIW, basically anything since Behind the Curtain.
Right, yeah.
And I think this might only be my second podcast ever.
Well, I'm not very good at it, so don't.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's start at the beginning, all right? Because anybody that's ever been to anything like the Chandler Biggins shows or the any of the early stuff knows that there would be no Pedro Deluca without Chandler Biggins.
Well, yeah, let's get into that. Let's get into, because I think that is I've probably talked about it loosely on the AIW podcast a little bit, but I think it is a very interesting story, and I'll let you tell it from your perspective.
Okay. Started going to Cleveland All Pro shows like 2000, 2001, and would sit front row, same spot every time, and there was this really loud guy that would always sit front row, and we kind of started talking because after a few shows, and coming to find out his name is Chandler Biggins. And so it ended up we would always sit next to each other. It would be Chandler. Sometimes he had a buddy that would come with him. It'd be myself, my wife Jen, and then if you went on down the front row line, former AIW referee Drew Taylor would sit next to us. And next to him would be our dear friend Big F and Tom, who unfortunately passed away last year.
That's what we know him as. Some people, knew him by his real name, Tom Troll. And yeah, we always knew him. Like, if probably to this day, if I looked at my phone, and it's probably 30 phone numbers ago for him, but it is still in my phone as Big F and Tom, not Tom Troll.
That's how it is in my phone as well. So we would always hang out at the shows together, but it was this weird, we're friends, but we're not really friends because we didn't know each other's names. And one show I was wearing, this is back in the Napoleon Dynamite days.
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s. So I had a Vote for Pedro shirt on. So Chandler was trying to...
As did many people that went to the mall in those days.
So Chandler was trying to get my attention, so he just goes, "Hey, Pedro!" And I just turned my head, and I was Pedro from that day on.
I mean, I don't think, maybe we're breaking a huge story here, but your real name is not Pedro.
No. People would probably, I'm going to keep it.
I never call you by your real name, and it weirds me out when people do.
Well, like around any wrestling venue, I won't even answer to my real name. Like, everybody knows me as Pedro because I tell people, if you called me by my real name, nobody's going to know who you're talking about.
Right.
So I will always be Pedro no matter what happens. So, yeah, don't even try to learn my real name because I won't answer to it at a wrestling show because I won't think you're talking to me.
Because there were times where, people, this is fast forwarding a little bit, but sometimes people would come, that would know you, start coming to AIW shows, and, they would say your name, and I say, who the fuck is that? What are you talking about?
Well, fast forward even further, when you were in the hospital with pneumonia, my father passed away, and there was a large contingent of AIW guys that came down to Akron for my dad's funeral, and it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke that
they just figured it out that day.
Yeah, they're like, wait a minute, what's Pedro's real name? Because we're here for this funeral and we have no idea what his last name is.
Right.
So getting back to Cleveland All Pro, so we became very good friends and always sat front row together. And then one day Chandler goes, "Hey," and he always had that big, deep, booming voice. "Hey, I'm running this wrestling show." And I'm like, okay. So he hands me this flyer, and I believe it was Gauntlet for the Gold 1.
Yeah, because I guess so. It was probably Hell on Earth 1, actually, because actually it would have been Gauntlet for the Gold 1. You're right, because we revealed him as the quote unquote owner at Hell on Earth 1.
Okay.
And the big thing was we were doing a completely free event. So the new owner, Chandler Biggins, was just giving free tickets out to everybody.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
And when he went to other shows, he really played that. He did not break kayfabe.
No.
So even though he was just like at that time an on-screen like authority figure, he would go to Cleveland All Pro and he had a fucking. This is a shoot too. He had a briefcase and it was just full of tickets.
Amongst other props and things.
Yeah, but so I do believe that he probably was like, "Hey, I'm running this wrestling show."
So I go to Gauntlet and kind of as a photographer, fan, security guard, just guy around the ring.
Yeah, because so I don't know how he presents that to us, but like early AEW was like this weird mismatch of like people like tag-alongs that were just like on the staff somehow. Like I don't even know. Like people would be like, and it's kind of crazy to think about it now. You know, in my 30s, but like at the time, I am 21 years old. I couldn't even imagine like, you know, some of these other people are teenagers and like there was no like authority like, hey, get the fuck out of here, we're running a wrestling show. It was like, oh, this is like this is Greg Iron. He's well, you know, he wasn't Greg Iron at them. He's like, oh, he's a security guy, and Dave the Potato is a security guy, and oh, this is my friend Pedro, he's a security guy.
And like there's people that was there as quote unquote security guards. To this day I've never seen them again in my life. Like I have no idea who they were.
There was probably so many people that played AIW security that I couldn't tell you their names for $1 million.
So I watched the show, and this was the infamous chopping up the Bible show.
Oh, gee. Yeah.
So I was kind of like, oh, that's a little out there. So I missed the next show, which I believe was Night of Mystery.
Yeah.
But then I came back for the next show, which I believe was Absolution, maybe?
No, it would have been like This Is Now.
Okay, This Is yeah, I was at This Is Now. So then I started becoming a regular. And it wasn't too long after that we did an outdoor show in Seven Hills.
That would have been the summertime.
Yeah, that would have been the summertime.
Like July-ish.
And that's where I like officially became ring crew.
Okay.
Was at Seven Hills because
it rained and I quit that day. I actually quit the company that day.
Because it was an absolute downpour. I mean,
I quit that day, me and the other owners or whatever you want to call them. That was like the first big rift. Like
it was just a madness.
It was a clusterfuck, and like I was always kind of booking the shows, and then they were like, no, we changed all this stuff, and like there was all these other people there, and there's people I'd never saw, like had no idea who they were. They showed up, they were booked, they were like told they were booked. Like it was a mess. It rained. There was something going on with me and some girl that the other guy had a crush on, like in secret.
Wow,
and like
they're going deep now.
It was like a whole big thing that day, and I was like, I fucking quit this fucking company. I
never knew you quit. That's interesting. I never knew you quit AIW.
That day I did, yeah. And I was like, fuck this. I do all this shit. Like that's the first big like, you guys don't know what the fuck you're doing. Of many to come.
That's a good thing
because if you think about it, so that would have been 2006,
mm-hmm.
And then by the summer of 2007, we are totally split.
Yes, because March of 2007 was the first time I ever rang announce.
So I think I think you pretty much, and I never even thought about it, like that was the day that the splinter of the original AIW started, was that day that you came on board at that weird like Seven Hills show, because it was just such a fucking clusterfuck.
Because I won't mention him by name, but one of the former owners or bosses of AIW said, anybody that stays and helps tear down, I'll give him free merch for life. I'm like, okay. Yeah, so that's how I became ring crew.
How long did that last? Because you're still alive.
I'm still alive, yeah. Barely. But so then I don't know how deep you want to go with this, but then it went from just helping out with ring crew to pretty much taking over ring crew, because it was getting to the point where nobody really knew how to put the ring together. So I just kind of figured it out. And then it just so happened my dad had a trailer that would hook up to my truck, and we started pulling the ring with that trailer and kind of eliminated the other former owner from even touching the ring.
Right.
And that got the ball rolling for something else. I don't know how much you want to get into here.
Well, statutes of limitations, but it would be stored at different places and stuff. But the fact that you had the trailer and all that stuff, it really set things in motion for it to be me and Chandler,
Right.
and like you were involved in that whole thing, and you played dumb and played both sides there for a little bit. But we're getting way too far ahead of ourselves.
Way too far, because that was, wow. I don't even know how far ahead that was, but...
That would have been 2008, 7, 8, somewhere.
Yeah, because there was a good solid year, at least a solid year, once I started ring announcing and replaced Chuck Roberts, that we were all still together.
Right.
So, but it just so happened, going back to in reverse here to my first ring announcing for AIW, we were at a little show in Strongsville that I believe was put together by Josh Emanuel, and I had brought the ring up, set it up, was there real early.
No, it was in Shaker Heights, Ohio.
It was in Shaker Heights? Okay.
It was a Battle Bowl show, right?
Yeah, Battle Bowl.
Yep.
Okay, that was Shaker Heights?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was never released, I don't think. Or maybe they found it recently. I think maybe that was recently found on some other video.
I know for the longest time there was like no footage of it.
I think it's for sale now. I think they found it on a hard drive somewhere.
I'll have to look up on Smart Mark and see if I can get that, because that was the official debut of Pedro Deluca, because we were just messing around at the ring, and a kid by the name of Patrick Hayes and Josh Emanuel were playing around in the ring, and I was just outside the ring doing Howard Finkel ring introductions, and it just so happens that Chuck Roberts didn't show up that night or couldn't make it.
Wasn't booked, or
wasn't
who knows?
booked, forgot about, I don't know. And somebody said, hey, have that Pedro guy do it. He's pretty good at it. So in the thousands of things that Thorne and Chandler are trying to get done, they're just like, stay behind the curtain and just announce the show.
Oh, because I think we were gonna like Paul Heyman house show it and just like have somebody announce from behind the curtain, and then we just said, oh, you just do it.
Okay. So I did it that one time, and then I don't know. I guess I impressed some. Although I do remember that night I messed up your introduction. I figured, oh shit, well I'll never get to do this ever again, because I said his opponent and you were his tag team partner, because it was Battle Bowl.
I probably didn't even fucking notice.
No, you screamed at me. You're like, I'm his fucking partner. So.
I was a little hot-headed back in those days.
But and so it wasn't too far long after that I just kind of took over. I know it would have been Absolution 2. I did not ring announce, and I was kind of bummed out. And Drew Taylor was like, what, you got the best spot in the show? You got to carry Vicky Gambino back to the locker room. So
who did Chuck? I think Chuck Roberts did that one, maybe?
yeah, Chuck Roberts ring announced Absolution 2. And then it wasn't long after that the big split really started coming about. And
That happens right after Absolution 2. That happens 1 month later. Absolution 2 is in May. We did that weird show in Michigan that
really caused the riff.
That was when it was all done. And then, our first show would have been the Campus Invasion show.
My actual in-ring debut was up at the Funky Frog when Chandler wrestled J-Rock.
So that's before splitting up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the split wasn't too long after that. And then we did Campus Invasion, and I can remember that day, I pulled the ring down to wherever, Ohio University, and I'm like, where is this place at?
It's at a house.
It's at a house. And I'm like, wait, we got the Honky Tonk Man at a fucking house? And I had to back the trailer like up this
Weird
ravine.
windy college driveway.
And then we're getting there, and like we don't even know who's going to appear on the show. Like we had no idea who was actually going to show up for the show. And I remember Sammy Callahan pulled in, Super Oprah was there, Nick,
Michael Tarver.
Michael Tarver was there, and I think Kano was there.
No,
Kano wasn't there.
Dio Salvador.
Okay.
And Carlton Kaz.
Yeah, Carlton Kaz.
And Matt Riot, R.I.P.
Yeah.
And Matt Wadsworth wrestles on that show. He wrestles me on that show.
But everybody wrestled like 3 times, because we did like a little mini tournament, didn't we?
No, we just did whatever the fuck, because we didn't know what was going. We didn't know if people were going to come, and then all of a sudden there's like 500 people there.
Oh, and that's the best part of that whole show. So the show is supposed to start, and there's literally nobody where we're at. So Nick or Thorne sends me out to the ring, and I'm like, there's nobody here. But I ring the bell, and it was like literally the floodgates opened up. There's just people coming out of everywhere. There's people up on housetop roofs. They're up in trees. The ringside area is just completely full of people in like 2 seconds. It was amazing.
It was a crazy time. Man, there's so much that we could jump around and cover. One thing that I thought was interesting is I remember going to your old house and you had framed, like, on the stairs all the note cards and photos from your first ring announcing gig, which I think, like, a lot of people kind of take it for granted when they, like, do something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like a thing they do, and you, like, actually took the time to, like, save everything and frame it. I mean, I just always thought that was so interesting.
Well, the way I looked at it, okay, I got in late. Back then, I was like 28-ish. So I never thought that this would ever go anywhere. So when you guys asked me to do it was Driven by Suffering, right? Where Chandler wrestled J-Rock. So when I did that show, I'm like, this is my WrestleMania. Because, I mean, I'm 28. I'm 250 pounds. I'm never going to be a wrestler.
Right.
I mean, I always loved wrestling since I was 10 years old. Thorne's been to my house. He's seen my wrestling collection. I have a huge wrestling collection, magazines, DVDs, VHS tapes, figures, everything. And so just being able to get in the ring, that was a big deal to me, that I got to announce this show. You know, there was several guys on that show that went on to do bigger and better things and, you know, signed in the big companies. But to me, it was just like a dream come true. It was literally a dream come true that I got to be a part of a pro wrestling show. And that's why I framed my note cards and had pictures of everybody on the show in that frame.
But what I found was interesting kind of about your journey is you kind of you don't even try, and it becomes like you get all of this work from all these places that you attended as a fan, which is kind of like taboo, you know, when you think about it. Like, that never really happens, you know? It's kind of like, oh, he's a fan, keep him out. But, like, all of a sudden, because you were kind of a fan that was, like, respected by everybody, you know, even like the JT Lightnings and, you know, you started getting other gigs just, you know, by being around.
After Driven by Suffering, I mean, it just exploded. I mean, I wasn't even the official AIW ring announcer, but, you know, there was multiple promotions like, hey, you're really good at this. We don't have a regular ring announcer. Will you be our ring announcer? And, you know, all told, I think I ring announced for 17 different promotions in the tri-state area.
Yeah, and, like, around here, there was, like, Hank Hudson, and then Chuck Roberts came into the scene, and that was it.
That was it, yeah.
That was it. And then, you know, you kind of popped up, and, like, you know, Hank still does stuff. And I think he still did most, if not all, JT shows. Yeah. Did you ever do a JT show?
I was an in-ring interviewer / backstage interviewer for JT.
I knew that you did something for him. I wasn't sure if you ever rang announced Cleveland All Pro.
But, like, JT would always have me go pick up guys at the airport for him.
Even when you're a fan.
Even when I was a fan, because I lived right by Akron Canton Airport. So I was like picking up Buff Bagwell and Sumi Sakai and Marty Jannetty and all these guys before I was ever even in AIW.
Right.
And, you know, JT was always, it was weird because JT would always pull me and Jen out of the line outside of Turner's and say, no, you guys come in.
Right.
Like I never had to stand outside. So I was always getting pulled in. So, you know, I knew Traxler long before, you know, I knew AIW or even Mega.
And that's the thing is, like, you know, everyone has their kind of stories of, like, tumultuous times with JT Lightning. But, like, he also, like, would do things that, like, no, come on, you know what I mean? Like, don't stand in the cold. Like, you know, if he knew you, you know what I mean? Like, he would take care of you. And I don't think that gets talked about enough, you know, those stories about JT.
I mean, not only did JT pull me in, but, you know, long before I was a ring announcer or even in the business, you know, JT was always pulling us in. I always had, like, first dibs on any of the DVDs or merch and everything. He gave right before he died. He gave me this massive stack of old. It wasn't just Cleveland All Pro. The thick cardboard rainbow promo posters.
Yes,
there was Cleveland All Pro. There was ECW ones in there. There was, I mean, just all kinds of different promotions. But he gave me a big stack of those. He gave me every NWA and WCW pay-per-view ever made.
Wow.
So he just gave me all these like burned discs. Man, I mean, and JT, like, I love just sitting down and talking to JT.
You know, that's what bums me out is nobody sat down and did a podcast with JT.
Right.
There's like one thing on YouTube where it's like a 15 or 20 minute interview with him where he's talking. But other than that, like, to my knowledge, nothing like that exists where somebody sat down with JT and just talked. And like, what I find now as I've gotten older is like when you're younger, you're like, this fucking guy don't know what he's talking about. And now it's like, if we would have just been doing things that way forever, you know what I mean? Like, he really had the plan, like, focus on your locals, bring in talent to work with them, bring in a star to, you know, draw a crowd. And like, just think about, you know, at those times he wasn't doing, you know, he was doing like maybe like $10 8x10s in the ring or whatever.
Right.
But like
Polaroids. He was big on Polaroids.
or Polaroids. That's what I mean. Polaroids. Yeah.
Still got my Jerry Lynn and my Gangrel and my Monty Brown.
But you know,
Polaroid.
like he really kind of had a good plan down, and you know, I think if he would have figured out video distribution,
Yeah.
Cleveland All Pro would be talked about in a different vein than it is now, in my opinion.
I mean, the people that, you know, I know everybody says, oh, he had all these people, but no, you don't understand. He knew a star when he saw it.
But what I'm saying is, even though he knew a star, he always focused on the local core.
Right.
You know what I mean? To where he wanted his guys to be the stars to his crowd. And, you know, he would also bring in these kind of flavors of the month at that time, you know, indie people like Punk and Cabana and all these people came through. And he would do that. And he would cater somewhat to the infancy of the internet. But like he never strayed from going full tilt into that. And I think, you know, if you look at some of those shows back in the day, like I'm talking like late 90s Cleveland All Pro, early 2000s Cleveland All Pro, there was a lot of good stuff that probably, unless you were there, nobody saw.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of his stuff never went anywhere. A lot of the master footage was destroyed in a flood. You know what I mean? Like,
and it's kind of sad because I can remember JT had the master tapes of Cleveland All Pro.
Every show, yeah.
Every show.
And he was going to give them all to me and Chandler.
I have a few of them. Not many, but the master tapes from whatever cable station he was on.
Yeah, like local, you know, cable access TV.
I have a few of them.
But he was going to give us, like, everything.
Yeah, and
it was all destroyed, like, right before he got really sick.
That's very depressing and heartbreaking because, I mean, and the shows were fun to be at. I mean, there was always, you never knew who was going to show up at a show because, I mean, you'd be sitting there and you would kind of like look over in the concession area and like, oh, that's John Cronus in there eating pizza. Wasn't on the show, but he was just there hanging out.
And I don't know if I was at that show or not, but I do remember hearing a story that John Cronus was just randomly at Cleveland All Pro.
He was just randomly there. Before he was Dolph Ziggler, he would hang out all the time at Cleveland All Pro shows. There was somebody else that just showed up. One of the Dude Busters.
Oh, yeah. Not Trent Beretta. Kalen Croft.
Caleb, yeah. He would always just randomly show up. And
Chris Pavone wrestled.
Yeah. And when he would show up, then Dolph Ziggler, Nick Nemeth, whatever you want to call him, he would show up just to watch him.
Right, because they knew each other from whatever, OVW or whatever.
And then, like, there was a show like Lexi Fife just randomly showed up just to watch the show.
I mean, so let's kind of, like, not even JT, but, like, let's get into just, like, independent wrestling in general. I know I've told this story before, but I remember going to a show in Stowe, and I saw Dave Bautista wrestle there. Mm-hmm. You know, he wrestled this guy named Jay Pumper, and Jerry Lawler and the Cat were there.
Right.
You know, like, you were kind of from this the Akron area where we're recording this. Like, what like, what is your? Do you have a recollection of a first indie event that you went to?
Yeah, actually, I don't know if Cleveland fans would know this name, but the Green Hornet was the promoter here in the Akron area. He would run at like all the local high schools doing fundraisers, and usually he would use a lot of the guys from the ASWA, like Chip Endale and the Prince of Polyester,
Like
Thunder Morgan.
Jimmy, what's his name? Who?
Yeah, he's the
Nightmare Jimmy Lee.
Yeah, Jimmy Lee was on a lot of his shows, but then, he started getting more and more of these high schools, so he was making more money, and he started bringing in names. My first like major Green Hornet show I went to, it had Demolition Axe, Sensational Sherry, the Bushwhackers, and I want to say Jimmy Snuka on it. So to me,
like those are the indie days that are just like, man,
Right.
like think about all that footage that has just like probably wasn't even recorded.
no,
you know what I mean?
there was
Like,
no videotaping of those shows at all.
just a show. And like, I saw something going around on social media. It was like 1993 indie, Papa Shango versus Hacksaw Jim Duggan. You know what I mean? Like,
Kill
just,
to see that. Like,
but just think about in that era how many things like that happened. Like one of the first indie shows I went to was somewhere in this area. I would have to ask Wadsworth, but he was like, his family was like really into the infancy of the internet. So they had, his lastname.com, and like he had his own little section where he talked about how he was a wrestling fan and you can email me about wrestling. And like some guy, he was like an indie worker, named Talon at the time, like sent him a message and was like, hey, you got some good size, you should come down and train with us or whatever, like we have a show. And it was a show run by this guy Bubba the Stompin' Hillbilly,
oh yeah,
and it was like in like an abandoned storefront. There was like 10 people there, and I would have to I bet you Wadsworth would know the exact place that we went, but it was somewhere in the Akron area, because I remember in that, this is like, you're talking 1997 or 98. Like,
Okay.
I remember going with them. We had to like print out the map quest, you know what I mean? And like, we're like teenagers driving to this show. And I remember, Beef Stew Lou Marconi was on it, and Frank Stiletto, and, the bouncer was on it. And this guy, Bubba the Stompin' Hillbilly, he like rode like a Harley to the ring inside. And like, there was like 20 people there. And from there, handsome Frank Stiletto was like, hey, I'm running this show in Medina. And like, it was like the day after an ECW house show, he was like, gave us a flyer, and it was like the Pitbulls, the Bushwhackers, Reckless Youth, Mike Quackenbush, Tom Brandy,
Wow.
Christian York, Joey Matthews,
holy crap.
Stevie Richards. And there's even more people on it.
Oh my God.
And like 12 people in the crowd, including me and Wadsworth.
That's depressing.
And like, I have a Polaroid with the Pitbulls from that show.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm like 14 years old.
That kind of stuff.
I'm like 14 years old, and I have the Polaroid with the Pitbulls. And I remember, like the Bushwhackers like licked my face, and like, like Stevie Richards was like all like, this is when he was kind of like fucked up. He was all like fucked up. He just had his like throat surgery, I think. He
Okay.
couldn't talk, and like, he had kind of a reputation around like shows in Pittsburgh for getting a little unruly, and out of hand. And, it was, but you don't see shows like that anymore, because like those guys were probably like, not making, like, I think indies in those days were just like the big shows, and it was like, we're going to pay you off the house. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it wasn't like, oh, Demolition wants $5,000. It was like, well, Demolition Axe, you're in the main event, you're going to get this much out of the gate. And like, because all those shows in the 90s had like such huge names on
Oh
them.
yeah, like I loved going to those shows. I mean, because teenage me at that, I'm talking like '96, and that was my senior year of high school. I've got action figures of these guys,
Right.
And it's just like, holy shit, I'm gonna meet this dude that I like had my LJN rubber guy, ripping the paint off of him, banging him around the Rock'em Sock'em ring, and now I get to meet this guy.
Right. And like, I remember going to shows like, King Kong Bundy and Jimmy Snuka and Wadsworth and I were actually just talking about this last week at the Winchester. We were driving because we drove to the Winchester together, and we were talking about how we went to this show. It was at Garfield Heights High School, and like we realized like the L for this show must have stood for ladies because it was all female matches, but Typhoon was there. Typhoon was there, and he had all his Typhoon shit on, and we were like, we're the big smart marks at the time. We were like, we want you to be Tugboat, like we should be Tugboat, like remember when you were Tugboat, like just fucking. He probably hated us, right? Like, oh, you should be Tugboat, and he was like, no, I'm booked as Typhoon tonight, brother, and just blowing us off, and he came out to the ring, and he looked at us, and he gave us a fucking Tugboat, like, oh, you know what I mean? And we were like, fuck yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
it's the highlight of your fandom, right there.
And like, we're probably, probably 14 or 15 at the time, you know what I mean? And you just don't see stuff like that anymore. You used to be able to go to a show, Sabu would be there, or like All Furman, or like just these random Tommy Rich, Doug Gilbert, all these random ass names.
Well, that's actually how I stumbled upon Cleveland All Pro Wrestling. I went to a WWE show, well, WWF back then, but at whatever it was back then, Gun, Quicken Loans, whatever it was. But JT was out there passing out flyers, and Sabu was on the flyer. And the first show I went to, the main event was... It was a 6-man. So I think it was JT, Ricky Morton.
So it was a double shot weekend.
Yeah.
Night 1 was in Garfield Heights. Night 2 was at the Lakewood Masonic Temple.
Yes, I went to the Lakewood Masonic Temple.
JT got arrested the night before at the Garfield Heights show he pushed a cop and he got arrested.
Really? I didn't know that story.
And so all the names were on both nights, and like the next night, the dog Al Green was on the show.
Yes.
And it was like Ricky Morton, Al Green, and like Sabu against 3 local guys or something.
Well, Bobby Blaze was in it.
Bobby Blaze, yeah. I have it. I've uploaded this match on YouTube, I think.
And the Stro.
The Stro did a lot of JT
Yeah,
shows.
the Stro and the Maestro, the Stro. He was there. Robbie, what was his name? Robbie Eagles and USWA or
something like that.
Gorgeous George.
Gorgeous George the Third or something. But I remember JT and Sabu were like arguing over a payoff, and like Sabu was like throwing a fit, and like he walked out he was yelling like when the show was going on, like he walked out from the backstage and was yelling, and like it was like a big scene. And the main event of that show was the Shoot Battle Royal.
The Shoot Cup Battle Royal won by
Eden, just because he's the fattest guy that couldn't get thrown over.
Yeah.
But it was like a real shoot, like.
Yeah, it was pretty cool because like JT was out in the crowd, had fans pulling names or numbers out, and that's who got introduced next. So it was a legit shoot, and that was my introduction to the Widowmaker, Jason Bain, and Michael Hellborn, and
8-Pac, and all those guys.
8-Pac. No, the Wild Cards wasn't on that.
No. Mr. Cool Brad Vaughn would have been on that.
Yes.
You know who else was on that show? I'm pretty sure Hito from FMW.
Yes, Hito was there because
Mr.
everybody thought he was Tajiri.
Mr. Insanity, Toby Klein. Because the night before, Hito wrestled Sabu for like an FMW belt or something.
Really? Oh, wow.
They said something like that.
There was another name there. I think there was a women's wrestler there.
It could have been.
Because JT would always usually have a woman's match on his shows.
Yeah, especially during those years too.
I'm not sure, but that was my introduction to Cleveland All Pro, and I'm like, this is amazing. Like, all these guys that I've seen on TV, I can come up and see and get their autograph and everything. Yeah, I'm going to come to every show.
Right. That stuff is what made me fall in love with independent wrestling. I mean, just those experiences, like, people don't realize it now, and like, we're probably a little bit to blame because, we're trying to like build up a quality scene, but like in those days, you could go to an indie show within driving distance every single weekend.
It was bad, though.
Some of them were bad.
It was bad.
And none of them had a crowd.
No.
You know what I mean? But you could go to a show every weekend. And
everybody wore the trash bag pants and
But there would always be like some random ass name.
Yeah.
Like, I remember driving to Paynesville to go see the Fallen Angel Christopher Daniels for the first time and Amazing Red wrestle M-Dog.
Wow.
And, that's probably, 2002, 2003, maybe. You know what I mean? Like, right in that era, because, Paynesville had shows. And then There were shows in Lorraine that weren't even Traxler shows. Like this guy Rod Destiny would run shows, and he would always have ECW names. And sometimes this guy TNT would run shows in Worcester, which wasn't that far.
Which TNT? The one with the camo face paint? Or?
No. He would be on some JT shows in the the late '90s, early.
So he was the red, white, and blue one. TNT?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was like 8 TNTs in the area
But there was just so many shows during the area, and none of them drew. But like when you're a teenager and that's all you want to do is go see wrestling live, for $5 or something.
Well, you got to throw in the World Pro Wrestling of Jerry Gray in there too.
I never saw any of those shows.
Oh, see, that was the big thing that it kind of killed the Canton Civic Center down here in Akron. He would run shows and promise all these gigantic names, like he'd have the Road Warriors.
No one would ever be there.
And yeah, they wouldn't show up. So, like, you would be going expecting like Sid Vicious, the Road Warriors, and who was the other? There was another gigantic name, but you got like Public Enemy and Kevin Sullivan and Brian Knobs,
which still okay.
It's still okay, but
not the Road Warriors.
Not the Road Warriors. No.
And I remember specifically maybe one time JT was advertising Masato Tanaka, and something happened and the deal fell apart and he was not there. But most of the time JT had his names for the most part.
Just didn't he replace him with Ulf Herman or something?
Probably.
Like that? Okay.
Yeah, probably, which, Ulf Herman did a lot of those Cleveland All Pro shows, but I remember going, and I think it was like they were advertising like a barbed wire match or something with Masato Tanaka, and then like he wasn't there, or whoever he dealt with probably didn't, like his middleman person like Tommy or Tracy probably didn't like properly book it or whatever, you know what I mean?
Because it was a different world too that back then, booking guys too, because most of them, I don't know if you would call it an agency back then, but like, didn't they usually travel by like a carload? Like you would book a carload.
Yeah, so they would be like, hey, JT, we're doing, ECW in Buffalo and Cleveland, and then we got nothing Sunday. So then JT would add a show and like get some ECW guys on, or if there was a weird off weekend for ECW, him and Rod Destiny would split ECW guys. Because Sabu would have like a Winnebago, and then like people would get in the Winnebago with him and do like a whole loop, and then they would wind up in Cleveland for the loop, and then they would just stay on the road, like they would never go home.
Wasn't there also like I think it was a woman that like controlled like all the names out of?
I know who you're talking about, and I can't remember her name.
But she had like Frankie Kazarian and
that was Jack. Her name was Jacqueline.
Okay,
she would book like. She'd be like, give me $500, and then she would give you like $2,000 worth of talent. Like I think because she was trying to like hook up with the guys or something, but like for like some bargain price, you would get like all these names, like New Jack,
Chris Sabin, Kazarian, the SATs, Amazing Red.
But you got to book Matt Vandal,
Matt Vandal. Hey, former Cleveland All Pro heavyweight champion Matt Vandal.
Paid for by Jacqueline, I'm sure. Jackie. But, we'll wrap this up because we've been going for about a half hour already, a little over. So this will be the first of many just random walks down memory lane with you, Pedro, for the Patreon.
Let's just talk wrestling. That's all I know is wrestling.
I think that's all any of us know anymore. So
wrestling and dealing with a 5-year-old that thinks he's 21.
Well,
he told me last night he needed Mountain Dew and Doritos.
Oh, jeez.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Patreon subscribers. And hey, anytime you guys want to hear from me, I'm honored that you guys think I'm this
big shot
special guest. So anytime.
All right.
I'm good. I'm down to do this. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.